So I thought I'd do this one now while it's still fairly topical. Rubbishy Username asked me to do a video about Joker, and I just got back from seeing it now while I'm recording. I don't know when I'll upload this, but while I'm recording it's fresh in my mind. I'm going to kind of talk about a couple of points and things I drew from the film that I think are worth discussing. The first is childishness to do with the character. Well, first I should say I thought he was phenomenal. Joaquin Phoenix is brilliant in this role. He's almost certainly going to win an Oscar, and if nothing else, it's worth seeing the film just for his performance. But yeah, Arthur Fleck, the character, has a really childish side to him, which trauma can sometimes cause. He's emotionally delayed in many ways that sort of make him a bit like a big kid. And I'm not talking big kid like Lenny from Mice and Men exactly, you know, they could be incredibly intelligent or assertive or any number of things just like any human being, but every now and then a slightly innocent childish side will reveal itself. Sometimes they'll just seem incredibly immature, and that's Arthur Fleck. You know, a level of emotional development got stuck somewhere, and rather than being like a person who grew out of childhood into something more rounded, he's left a little bit at odds with himself, you know, partly grown up and partly still feeling like a 5-year-old inside. So childishness reveals itself in Arthur Fleck a lot. I noticed it first when he was watching Murray's show, somewhere near the start of the film. He was watching it with his mum, and he had this kind of, there's a scene where he daydreams about being in the audience and talking to Murray. And in that scene, he stands up with his hands behind his back, and he twists his hips back and forth ever so slightly, in that sort of stereotypical way that a very little schoolgirl might. And the way he talks about his mum in that scene is worded so much like the way a little kid speaks. And I can't be specific on the wording, obviously, because I've just seen it in the cinema, but he says something like, "My mum always tells me to smile and put on a happy face, and she said I was here to spread joy and laughter." And also I should say, speaking of Murray, that Arthur tends to think of him and to talk about him and interact as though Murray is a father figure, which is interesting considering the direction of the plot. But you also see the childishness though in the awkward way he runs. Like, it's almost like he's never quite sure of his footing. You know the way kids, when they haven't been able to walk for too many years yet, so it's not quite so fluent and natural, and there's something slightly awkward, and there's a wide kind of closed-lipped smile he does, and this look he pulls that I don't know how to explain, but if you look out for it in the film, you'll see what I mean. A childish kind of look he pulls. There's just something very 5-year-old to Arthur Fleck, and that's part of what makes him seem so dangerous and menacing and unsettling. But to move on, because there were more things I wanted to talk about than just childishness, and I've already been talking a fair amount of time, laughter was one of the other ones. And that's one of the notable things about this version of Joker, that his laugh is a condition here, and it's not a condition I've personally ever heard of, but I can absolutely believe it. When he feels afraid, although not necessarily afraid actually, I'd say overwhelmed with difficult emotions, you know, because that can be sadness or anxiety or panic, anger, but when he's overwhelmed with emotions that are difficult to cope with, he starts laughing, and sometimes he does it so much to the point of choking. And I imagine that is a real condition. But even if it's not, it's 100% believable, because honestly there is such a thin line in all of us between terror and excitement. So thin that they're almost the same thing. I mean, think about why we watch horror movies. We enjoy the thrill, we enjoy that terror, it's exciting. And, you know, think about fantasies some people have about bondage and stuff. Obviously the reality of that scenario would be just traumatizing beyond belief, but as a fantasy imagined in a safe environment, it excites a lot of people. And emotionally, it is a defense a lot of us can use to turn our terror into excitement instead. And you see that level of manic, uncontrollable excitement in Joker's laugh. You know, painful feelings are scary, even if it's not an emotion of fear, even if it's just sadness or whatever else. It's terrifying to have feelings that feel too overwhelming. That in itself is a very scary thing. And you need a defense mechanism if they're too much to bear. You need some kind of defense to shut out that terror, to survive. And one of Arthur Fleck's defenses is laughter. You know, turn it into something funny, even if he doesn't actually find it funny, even if he doesn't want to laugh at all and he feels like crying inside. Even then, he can't get it out. His body won't let him get the emotion out because it's just too much to bear. It has to be held in, and instead out comes this nothing but this just hollow laugh. And I mean, we all know laughter can be used as a defense. We all use it every day. I mean, it's what about 70% of memes are built upon. But the idea it could be taken to such an extreme as with Joker, yeah, it definitely could. And actually, why he used this defense mechanism of laughter, I suppose, is unsurprising when you consider his mum had been telling him since he was a kid that he was put here to bring joy into other people's lives and that he needs to smile as much as he can and all those sorts of messages. And I guess that actually makes it unsurprising why he would want to become a comedian. You know, it's in some part living up to his mum's expectations. And actually, if Murray is like an imagined father figure, then it would be making him proud as well to become a comedian. And in a way, I guess that also, you can see how well that links to the childishness side as well. The idea of clowns and laughter. And because childhood is a place where you get parents and teachers and, you know, everybody telling you to be positive and giving you all those kind of happy, clappy, colourful, rainbow stuff where everything feels fun and happy and full of laughter and all that sort of stuff that you kind of see in Arthur Fleck, because there is so much about his character in this film that is perfection. But one of the things that did bother me in the film, and in a way it becomes a positive, and I realise it at the end, but I'll discuss it why it bothered me for the moment anyway. We'll see what you think. But what am I saying? Yeah, part of what bothered me is that a lot of what happened didn't exactly feel believable in the film. I mean, considering this is supposed to be a gritty, realistic version of Joker. And I won't talk spoilers, but let me try and list a few things. How incredibly cruel everyone is in the film feels just a bit exaggerated, I think. Like, the dickheads on the subway are a clear example, because they're just so over the top. They're almost like villains in a musical. You know, they're slightly cartoonish in how much of dickheads they are. And you've got the counsellor who, like every negative stereotype of a counsellor, is just asking the same questions, not really listening, not really empathising with you. And you know, there's how over the top, posh, twat, disconnected from the people that Thomas Wayne is made out to be in this film. And there's the fact that how conveniently Arthur's clip of his comedy gets played on Murray's show and ridiculed there, and Murray being his idol, and you're a bit like, well, that's kind of convenient, isn't it? And it's just lots of small things like that throughout the entire story that could happen, but either they're all exaggerated, or there's just so many instances of them that together it kind of doesn't feel believable. The big one though, there's a V for Vendetta uprising that happens in Gotham, where everybody wears clown masks and it causes complete chaos and destruction because they see on the news that a clown murdered some people that looked like they might be twats, and everyone goes, yeah, this is cause for a riot. I mean, there's a bit more to it than that, but it feels forced in the film. It feels a bit contrived. Suddenly out of nowhere, they're just rioting, all in clown masks, and there's this full-on movement, and you're just going, oh, okay, then there's a movement now. But I said there's a positive to this, and it's what I realised late on, is that all of this stuff does actually make sense if you viewed the events of the film through Arthur Fleck's eyes specifically. I mean, I talked a bit in the Good Will Hunting video about the little stories that run in the back of our minds. As much as we all might like to say we're realists, we never are. You know, our emotions are constantly distorting our view of the world. We never see everything objectively, particularly if it's our own lives. We never have any objective view on our own lives whatsoever because there's too much emotion. We have a little narrative that plays out instead. You know, like I'm a lucky person, I'm doomed to be alone forever, I'm a good leader. Then you have lots of them obviously, but whatever these things there are, none of them are exactly the objective truth. It's just kind of stories we tell ourselves based on our past experience. This is who I am, this is how my life goes, despite the fact it could, if we challenge these narratives, go very differently. And for example, Arthur Fleck's narrative is that the entire world tramples all over me. But it feels so incredibly bad for Arthur, and everyone feels so exaggeratedly dickhead-like. But of course it does, because that's how it feels to Arthur. I mean, if the story you unconsciously tell yourself is that everyone spits on me, everybody treats me like shit, I'm trampled on by everyone, you'll then unconsciously start looking out for the stuff that proves that story to be true. You know, Arthur will notice every single little bad thing that ever happens to him in his life, and he'll probably catastrophise all of them to a whole nother level. But any of the good things he won't really notice, because good things challenge this narrative he has about himself. And to recognise something that challenges your narrative would require kind of completely changing your entire mindset, and that's not an easy thing to do, plus it's unfamiliar. And so the point I'm saying is things feel so exaggeratedly bad in this film because that's how Arthur views them. You know, life is a thing of endless contradictions everywhere, but we don't see any of them in this film. All we see is the life is so shit for me message, because that's all Arthur takes in. And so then taken to the extreme, the idea that it's everyone else's fault, you might then start to get angry with everyone else and people and society in general, and taken even further, you might then want to get revenge. And that's the film. The story Arthur Fleck tells, the message he gives is, don't treat me like shit, you all made me do this. Society turned me into this killer. But that's not quite the reality. I mean, extremists are never that simple. They might want to absolve themselves of the bad shit they've done by telling us, it's not my fault, it's society's fault. And obviously in part it is, you know. Obviously society has a part to play. But being treated like shit doesn't turn everyone into a murderer. It doesn't. It doesn't turn everyone... It doesn't make everyone enjoy stabbing people through the eye with scissors. You know, Arthur Fleck became Joker not because society is shit, but because he only saw the very worst in society, the very worst in his life. He filtered out the possibility that he could find a way forwards. You know, he let that little story in his head take over and completely warp his view of reality for him. Look, what I was trying to drive at, and I haven't really expressed it clearly enough, is that you can get to the end of this film and it can feel all a bit meaningless. Joker mostly achieves what he wants to, and then the film just sort of ends and you're kind of like, well, what was the point in this film? What was the message? It feels a bit empty. And what I'm saying is that's kind of the point. Of course it feels empty, because this is Joker's story, and his view of the world is empty. And if this is through the eyes of Arthur Fleck, then that is what we get.